And I'll share my screen. There we go. And okay. So we left off last time about, we're talking about alleyways, and to continue the discussion of, I'll say the bracha in a moment, but continuing the discussion about requiring when there are joint owners of property and somebody wants to do something to change the property, whether they can insist on other co-owners to chip in or not. Like what kind of what kind of improvement or change to property is it required for everybody to do? Okay, so we're discussing alleys. So Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we left off here at Rabbah bar Chana, who says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to alleyways that are open to another city. So there's a halacha on this. Just a second. There. Alleyways that are open to another city. With regard to alleyways that open to a road leading to a different city, the residents of that city can prevent residents of the alleyway from blocking off the alleyway, since such obstruction would block the route to their city. According to the SMA, the SMA, and I don't know who that is, this is so even if there's an alternative route, but the route through the alleyway is closer. So here's an interesting thing about this alleyway. So I was in Florida last Sunday till Wednesday, and that's why we didn't have class last Sunday, among other things. So Lenore and I were in Miami Beach, and we were supposed to get to the Miami airport on Wednesday afternoon for a 5:30 flight back home to Baltimore. So unbeknownst to us, the president was at his home in Mar-a-Lago. And when that happens, those of you who might be familiar with Miami Beach know that there are 3 bridges off of Miami Beach onto the mainland. Just like I compare it to Manhattan, there are 3 ways to get off of Manhattan to New Jersey. You got the GW Bridge, you got the Lincoln Tunnel, you got the Holland Tunnel. So if you can imagine, if you're in Manhattan trying to get home in the afternoon after work, and one of those ways is closed off, what the impact on traffic to get home. So that's what it is, what it's like when the president is in Mar-a-Lago. One of those ways off of Miami Beach is closed off because he's there for security reasons. So it took us 2 hours to get from Miami Beach to the airport in Miami, and needless to say, we missed our flight. But Southwest was nice enough to get us onto a flight from Fort Lauderdale, and we made it home okay. But that's closing. It's more than an alleyway. It's closing off a road, and so it doesn't say anything here about closing the road for security reasons. This is for the people. This is closing off the alley for the people to have more privacy. And you can't do that if the alley is a way for people to get someplace else. It's one thing if an alley is just, an extra, adds like an extra courtyard or extra space for all the families. But it's another thing if the alley is a thoroughfare. So with regard to alleyways that are open to another city and through which one would ordinarily travel to reach that other city, if the residents of the city in which the alleyways are located wished to block them off, the residents of the city into which the alleyways open can prevent them from doing so because they have a right to reach their city via those routes. The Gemara explains, it's not necessary to state that they can prevent them from blocking the alleyways when there's no alternative route to reach their town, but they can prevent them from blocking the alleyways even when there is an alternative route, right? So there could be multiple routes from one town to another, but if the alleyway, if you close it off, closes one of those routes, you can't do it because all the routes have to be available to town. That's what Rabba Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan says. This is due to the reasoning that Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, as Rav says, one is prohibited from ruining a path that the public has established as a public thoroughfare. That is, steps may not be taken to prevent people from using it. So there's a road already established there, and people use this as a road. You can't block it off. So there's a note here, a path that the public has established. Tosafot, that's, so on the traditional page of a Talmud, you have Rashi, that's always in the middle part on the side, and then you have the rabbis of the generation or two after Rashi on the other side. Tosafot means additional ones, and they are on the other side of the page. So Tosafot explained that this halacha applies only when the owner of the property permitted people to walk there, in which case he may not retract that right by blocking the path. Nevertheless, if people troop through his property without permission, the owner can prevent them from doing so even by force. So this is, the thoroughfare that has been established is through private property, in which the owner of the private property has let people use his property as a pathway. So the owner of the private property has the right beforehand to keep the property closed and to not allow people from traipsing through his property. So it's a matter of precedent. If the property owner has already been allowing people to walk through, then he has to keep on letting people walk through. But if he hasn't already, he's allowed to keep people from even starting to walk through. Okay? This is in accordance with the statement of Rav Giddel. As Rav Giddel says, if the public has chosen a route for itself and they walk on it, what they have chosen is chosen, and it cannot be taken away from them. Okay? Rav Anan says that Shmuel says, with regard to alleyways that open onto a public thoroughfare, if the residents of the alleyways wished to put up doors at the entrance to their alleyways, the people who use the public thoroughfare can prevent them from doing so. And here's a picture of that. I have to make it smaller. Well, the words are kind of blurry, but you see the alley, and you see the public thoroughfare here and a public thoroughfare here. Maybe some people would want to use this alley as a shortcut to get from one public thoroughfare to the other, and the owners of the alleyway can close off the alley to prevent people from using their alley as a shortcut. Okay? And there's background, but so this is the background, which is the map. Okay. Some sages understood from this that this statement applies specifically to the area within 4 cubits of the public thoroughfare, in accordance with the statement that Rabbi Zera says, that Rav Nachman says, as Rabbi Zera says that Rav Nachman says, the 4 cubits in an alleyway that are adjacent to the public thoroughfare are considered like the public thoroughfare itself. Consequently, this area has the halacha of a public thoroughfare. But that is not so. There, the ruling of Rav Nachman was stated with regard to the issue of ritual impurity, with regard to which only the first 4 cubits of the alleyway are considered like the public thoroughfare. But here, with regard to doors set up at the entrance to the alleyway, sometimes the public thoroughfare becomes crowded with people, and they enter far into the alleyway, even farther than 4 cubits. So there's a note here about ritual purity and the opening of the alley. The reason for the difference in halacha between the 2 rulings is that in the case of any uncertainty concerning ritual impurity occurring in the public domain, it's deemed pure. Yeah, so we just have to remember that in the time of the rabbis, especially when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, the whole category of ritual purity was a major category, and people really had to be up on some of the important elements of ritual purity, because there are lots of things that can contract ritual purity or can contract ritual impurity, and then it can make people impure by touching it. So there are different places that are places of impurity, and different objects and liquids that can become impure as well. So it's a very complicated series of laws which don't apply today. But like I said, there is the only issue of ritual purity that really applies today is to married women and their monthly cycle. That is still something that applies because the purification process is not dependent on an offering in the temple. It's dependent on going to the mikveh. So that element of ritual purity still stands today, but that's mainly within the Orthodox community. But all other elements of ritual purity, like even coming into contact with the dead, that's more symbolic today, with the washing of the hands when departing a cemetery, and for a Kohen not to attend a funeral or to walk into a cemetery. That's all symbolic. But everything else with objects and liquids, food, are all not an issue today. Okay, so a red S means that we veer to a different topic. The Mishnah teaches, and the court does not divide a jointly owned field unless there is space in it to plant 9 kav of seed for this one and 9 kav of seed for that one. So remember, in the Mishnah, we're talking about dividing up a field where one co-owner of the field wants to have some kind of fence or divider in it. You can only do that if the field is big enough for this minimum amount of seed to be planted. So kav is just a measure. It's like a bushel. It's similar in, I'm not saying that it's the same amount as a bushel is, but it's a kav is like the name bushel. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda says the court does not divide a field unless there is place in it to plant 9 half kav of seed for this one and 9 half kav of seed for that one. So there's a dispute as to between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. What's the minimum amount? Rabbis say 9 kav. Rabbi Yehuda says half of that. And so they do not disagree with regard to the fundamental halacha, as this sage ruled in accordance with the custom of his locale, and that sage ruled in accordance with the custom of his locale. In Rabbi Yehuda's locale, even a smaller parcel of land was considered a viable field. So it all depended on the place and what they think is a minimum amount for it to be considered a field. The Gemara asks, the Mishnah was taught in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. What practice should be followed in Babylonia? Right? The rabbis of the Gemara are living in Babylonia, so they want to know what's the rule for them. Rav Yosef said, in Babylonia, a parcel of land of which is the area of a day's plowing is considered a field. If each of the parties will receive less than that, the field should not be divided. Okay, so it's not about the amount of seed that can be planted in the field. It's about the amount of plowing that can be done in one day. So everybody plows in the same way. I think there was an article in the Washington Post about this today or yesterday about tilling fields and the way of plowing a field that doesn't require fertilizer. I don't know. I just saw the article. I didn't read the article about this. So, but in ancient times, there's only one way to plow a field. You hook up a plow to an animal. An ox usually, maybe a donkey. So that's interesting, because no, but I think it's an ox. So and an ox can only walk so much and plow so much in a day. So however much they could plow in one day, that's the size of field that is the minimum that can be that you're left with after you're divided. If so, okay, so it's based on the plowing and not on the amount of seed. So the Gemara asks, what is meant by a parcel of land, the size of which is the area of a day's plowing? If it means a day's plowing in the planting season, that is the winter, when it's easy to plow, since the earth has already been turned over at the end of the summer, the field will not require 2 full days of plowing in the plowing season, that is at the end of summer, when it's more difficult to plow since the earth is hard and dry. In that case, he will have to pay his summer plowman 2 days' wages for less than 2 days of work. And if it means a day's plowing in the plowing season, the field will not require a day of plowing in the planting season. In that case, he will have to pay his winter plowman a full day's wages for less than a full day of work. Okay, so the amount of plowing is dependent upon how much you're going to have to pay the plowman. So that is the more significant factor in determining the size of field, because of what the cost is to the owner vis-a-vis the fee that he has to pay to the plowman, as opposed to the set cost of seed that would be planted. Okay, and so it's dependent upon which season you're plowing, because it's harder to plow in the summertime when the earth is dry than it is to plow in the wintertime when this earth is soft. Okay, so there are more issues involved if you're saying that the determinant factor is how much plowing, than there would be if you said it's all about the seed. The Gemara answers, if you wish, say it's referring to a day's plowing in the plowing season, and the field will still require a full day of plowing in the planting season, since he plows once before he sows the seeds, and then repeats the plowing after the seeds are sown. Right? You plow, and then you put the seeds in the furrow that's created by the plow, and then you plow again to turn the earth over on top of the seeds. If you wish, you say instead that it's referring to a day's plowing in the planting season, and the field will in fact require 2 full days of plowing in the plowing season if it's rocky ground, on which plowing takes longer. Right? So it could be dependent upon also the kind of ground that you're plowing. In connection with this discussion, the Gemara clarifies the conditions under which a cistern, from which its joint owners draw their water, is divided. Rav Nachman says it should be divided only if each party will receive the volume of water needed for a day's irrigation work. And as for an orchard, Shmuel's father says it should be divided only if each party will receive an area large enough to plant 3 kav, 1/3 of the measure required for a field. Okay, so we go on. That opinion is also taught in a Baraita with regard to one who says to another, I am selling you part of a vineyard, without specifying how much of the vineyard. Sumachos says he may not give him less than an area large enough to plant 3 kav. Rabbi Yossi says these are nothing other than words of prophecy. That is, I don't see the logic behind this statement, and it's as if it is as if based on prophecy and a heavenly decree, as the seller did not mention any area, but rather spoke in the most general of terms, part of a vineyard. The Gemara asks, what's the measure with regard to this matter in Babylonia? Rava Bar Kisna said 3 rows of 12 vines, which is the area a person can hoe in a single day. So you got 36 vines growing out of 3 rows. That's a lot of hoeing to get rid of weeds, and that would take all day to do, and that's the amount for a vineyard, for dividing a vineyard. In connection with Rabbi Yossi's statement that Sumachos's words are nothing but words of prophecy, the Gemara reports that Rav Avdimi from Haifa says, from the day that the temple was destroyed, prophecy was taken from the prophets and given to the sages. The Gemara expresses astonishment. Is that to say that a sage is not fit to be a prophet? Rabbi Avdimi seems to say that these are 2 distinct categories of people. The Gemara explains this is what Avdimi is saying. Even though prophecy was taken from the prophets, it was not taken from the sages. So there's a note. Rashi explains that prophecy was taken from those prophets who were not sages, but it was not taken from those who were sages. The Ramban, Nachmanides, finds this difficult, as it's clear from other sources that being a sage was a prerequisite for receiving prophecy. The Nachmanides and the Ritva explain that prophetic power was taken away, but the sages retained their divine inspiration. So it's always, it comes up in discussion in different places in the Talmud about the power of the sages and whether they have the power of prophecy or not. Maimar said, and a sage is greater than a prophet, as it's stated, and a prophet has a heart of wisdom. That is, he is wise. When comparisons are drawn, who is compared to whom? You must say that the lesser is compared to the greater. Here, too, prophecy is compared to wisdom, thus indicating that wisdom is greater than prophecy. So, the rabbis talk about, their authority to, of their role as rabbis to interpret the Torah and to derive Jewish law. So they have to read a lot into the Bible and biblical verses to kind of prove to the reader that sages have the authority and that they are divinely inspired. Abaye said, no, that this is so, that sages still enjoy the prophetic gift, as a great man makes a statement with regard to a point of halacha, and the same statement is then cited in the name of a different great man in accordance with his statement, indicating that the sages make their statements by way of prophecy. Rava disagreed and said, and what's the difficulty with explaining this? Perhaps they were born under the same constellation, and since they are similar in their traits, they reach the same conclusions. Rather, Rava said, no, that this is so, as a great man makes a statement, and the same statement is then cited in the name of the well-known Tana, Rabbi Akiva Bar Yosef, in accordance with his statement. It certainly cannot be maintained that the first sage is similar in his nature to the illustrious Rabbi Akiva, so he must have arrived at his statement through prophecy. Rav Ashi said, and what's the difficulty with explaining this? Perhaps they were born under the same constellation, and with regard to this issue, the first sage has the same understanding as Rabbi Akiva.
So these rabbis are into astrology?
Well, they use it when it's can be. I'm hesitating, Steve, because I'm figuring out how to answer it. So they are not into astrology as a power in its own right. They are into astrology as a method that God has allowed people to use to uncover more secrets. So it's a fine line that the rabbis walk in that they understand that elements of astrology can be Jewish as long as we understand that God allowed those elements of astrology to be used. All right, so when we say Mazel Tov, It really means good constellation, because
Hmm.
mazal is Hebrew for constellation. So
Hmm.
we're actually maintaining this idea of understanding the stars and the sign that you see in the stars as a Jewish thing to say when you're wishing mazel when you're saying mazel tov to somebody. And ancient synagogues have been uncovered through archaeology in Israel and outside of Israel from the time of the rabbis, and consistently on almost every mosaic floor of these synagogues are signs of the zodiac. So, yes, elements of astrology are used by the rabbis because they see it as a wonder of the sky above us that God created. Okay,
So they
Zella.
basically
Yeah.
they basically adapted Greek, um, I don't know what you would call it,
Yeah.
mythology. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. They adapted it, but made it clear to people that we understand that we're not bowing down to these constellations in the sky. We're not attributing that these constellations have power in their own right. The rabbis are saying these constellations are a further sign of the wonders of God, and it's just a further sign of how nuanced and multi dimensional God is. Okay, so that's the idea with the astrology, and that it's a dangerous step to take for the rabbis because it's clear lots of people could then see power in astrology and like go to a fortune teller and see power in a fortune teller rather than what the rabbis want, that no, the astrology is to be understood as a tool of God. Okay, Zella.
Yeah, I'm just not clear on what a sage is. I understand there's no prophets. Like, how is a sage compared to a prophet? Are any of these rabbis sages?
Right. So all of these rabbis are sages, and I think the rabbis of the time of the Talmud would say that rabbis of the time of the Mishnah are greater rabbis than they are. So there's a sense of the rabbis in rabbinic times, understanding that earlier generations are greater than later generations. But I think that they would understand that all of them in all generations are sages. And sages, so what does it take to be a sage? So I'm not sure um, about that. Like, in other words, uh, for me to become a rabbi, there was a set curriculum at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I went through the curriculum, and then I was duly ordained when I completed my work in those 5 years of being in rabbinical school. But for the rabbis in their time, it was different depending on the student. And the course of study was also different. I mean, there wasn't just sitting in the yeshiva all day to hear the lectures of the rabbi, but it's also following the rabbi around and seeing how the rabbi lived and learning from that as well. So, how long did it take? Every student is different. There's a lot of memorization involved in the time of the rabbis too, because they didn't really have books. They were based on these people whose job it was to remember discussions and then to repeat them. So there was a certain amount that sages needed to know by heart, and then they needed to prove that they had the intellectual capacity to apply their learning to real life and to interpretation. So every rabbi who would have students might decide that their students were eligible for ordination at different times. But the rabbis then also said, again, to prove their authority to the rest of the Jewish community at the time, they attributed to themselves certain certain powers that an average Jew doesn't have, like prophecy. So there's the famous story of the rabbi who insists that his opinion is right and all the other rabbis are wrong, and he makes a tree uproot itself and move and then root itself in a different place. He's able to make a stream flow in a different direction. He's able to make the walls of the yeshiva start tilting inward. So these are magical powers, but they are seen as prophetic powers, like you're channeling God to be able to do these things. And the rabbis also had power too, because they were able to stop the walls from totally collapsing on top of them. So that's just one story of many in which we see that the rabbis allegedly have these kinds of powers, which after the time of the Talmud, rabbis don't have these powers anymore. Like we don't have stories of Rashi or of Maimonides or Nachmanides or any other rabbis having great powers. The only rabbi that we know that has some kind of power is Rabbi Judah Loew of Prague, who's able to make the golem. That's the only rabbi in all of the Middle Ages until modern times who has these powers. But then there's a book that I have from the Holocaust. Yeah, just one second. So there are lots of stories of Hasidic rabbis in which Hasidic rabbis are known to have great powers, similar to stories of rabbis from the Talmud. So you go from the end of the Talmudic period, about 500 CE, to the time of the Hasidic rabbis, which is in the early 1700s and on. So you have like 1,200 years when you don't have stories, except for Judah Loew of Prague. He's from the 1500s in Prague. So he's the exception that proves the rule that there are no rabbis who are doing magical things. But then Hasidic rabbis have these stories. So there's a collection. There's a woman who taught Holocaust history and literature at Brooklyn College, and Lenore took her classes when she was a student there at Brooklyn College. Her name is Yafa Eliach, and she collected Hasidic tales of the Holocaust. So I have this paperback book, Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, which is fascinating and a powerful book to read because it has Hasidic rabbis of Europe in the time of the Holocaust were rounded up in the ghetto and then in concentration camps, and their disciples are in the concentration camps with them. And then stories emerged from survivors about the power of these Hasidic rabbis and what they did in the camps to provide comfort and inspiration to their Jews in order to survive every day. So there are stories in here that reflect the power of these rabbis that made it seem like they still had magical powers too. So, it's interesting. Did the rabbis of the Talmud have these powers or not? I don't think so. But if you're a person of faith and you love your rabbi, then you can believe that your rabbi is capable of doing these things. It's like saints in the Catholic Church. Did those saints actually do the things that are ascribed to them? And to become a saint today in the Catholic Church, you still have to, it has to be proven that the saint did something powerful that was supernatural. So it's just part of the how to become a saint today in the Catholic Church. So believers think that these people did these things. So if you can prove it, prove it. So other people have to see that the potential saint did those things. Then that's part of the process. Like Mother Teresa becoming a saint. She served the poor of Bombay or Mumbai. Calcutta. Did she perform miracles? Well, the poor who believed in her were transformed by her. They had faith. So, yeah. So, okay. Sages and prophecy. Rather, Ravashi said, know that this is so, as a great man makes a statement, and the same statement is then cited as a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai in accordance with his statement. The sage makes a statement that corresponds to words pronounced in heaven, which without prophecy is beyond human capability. The Gemara states, but perhaps he arrived at this idea by chance, without the assistance of prophecy, like a blind man who makes his way through a skylight. A blind man cannot deliberately find a skylight. Therefore, his finding it occurs by chance. The Gemara answers, but does the sage not offer a reason for his statement? The fact that he demonstrates an understanding of the issue indicates that he does not arrive at his idea by chance, but rather by prophecy. So, I think this is also getting to the idea of the right that the rabbis have to interpret Torah and derive new meanings from the Torah. So they have to allay any criticism that the Jewish community might have and say, how dare you, rabbi, interpret the Torah in a way that makes it seem like it's different from what the Torah is teaching. And the rabbis have to say, well, we're entitled to do this because we're given the gift of prophecy, and they claim that this was taught to Moses at Mount Sinai. So it's kind of circular reasoning. The rabbis claim that they have the authority to do this, and they claim that it came from Moses at Mount Sinai. But so again, like there's the classic story of Moses wants to know what's going to happen to the Torah in future generations. So God allows Moses to see into the future, and he attends a lecture by Rabbi Akiva in Rabbi Akiva's study hall. And Moses has no idea what Rabbi Akiva is talking about until Rabbi Akiva says, and this was taught by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. Then Moses feels better. So it's a beautiful story to say that, yes, the rabbis are teaching things that weren't in the Torah itself, but they have the authority to do that. And then in the end, the Jewish community accepted the fact that the rabbis had the authority to do that. Okay, we go on. Rabbi Yochanan said, from the day that the temple was destroyed, prophecy was taken from the prophets and given to imbeciles and children. The Gemara explains, in what way was prophecy given to imbeciles? It was like this incident involving Mar bar Rav Ashi, who was standing in the street of Mechoza when he heard a certain imbecile say, the head of the yeshiva, who will be appointed in Mata Machasya, signs his name Tavyume. Mar bar Rav Ashi said to him, who among the sages signs his name Tavyume? Nobody but me. Conclude from this statement by the imbecile that my hour has arrived, and I will reap success in this matter. He arose and went to Mata Machasya. By the time he arrived, the sages had already decided to appoint Rav Acha of Difti as the head of the yeshiva. As soon as the sages heard that Mar bar Rav Ashi had arrived, they determined not to proceed with their appointment without the approval of an important figure such as him. They sent a pair of sages to him to consult with him, and he detained them. They again sent a pair of sages to him, and he detained them as well. This continued until they completed a quorum of 10 sages. Once they reached 10 men, Mar bar Rav Ashi opened his lecture, taught, and expounded. He did not speak earlier because one should not open a lecture during the Kala, the gatherings for Torah study during the months of Elul and Adar, when less than 10 men are present. He was then appointed as head of the yeshiva. Understanding that he had been passed over for the position, Rav Achav Difti read about himself the rabbinic aphorism, anyone who is treated poorly will not soon be treated well, and anyone who is treated well will not soon be treated poorly. Rav Acha understood that he had lost the chance to be appointed, whereas Mar Bar Rav Ashi had the good fortune to be appointed and would remain in his position. Okay, so this is a long story proving that the imbecile who said that Tavyume was going to be the new Rosh Yeshiva, well, Mar Bar Rav Ashi made it happen. And he moved to the town and made it happen. All right, I'm just looking for background. Signs his name Tavyume. The word Mar often serves as a title, meaning master or teacher. It's also used as a term of address when speaking to an important person, or as a title for certain sages, such as members of the Exarch's family. There were also certain people whose given name was Mar. In any event, this episode demonstrates that Mar Bar Rav Ashi was not named Mar, but rather that Mar was an honorary title given to him as son of Rav Ashi, one of the generation's leading authorities. His given name was Tavyume, which is cognate with the Hebrew name Yom Tov. It is clear that he used his true name when signing documents or letters. Yom Tov actually is a name. And in fact, I had a teacher at Hebrew University my junior year, a teacher of Jewish history whose name was Yom Tov. Yom Tov, I think his last name was Assis or something like that. So it's not common, but it is a name. So Tavyume is the Aramaic version of Yom Tov, a good day, or a festival day. So maybe somebody born on a festival day would be named Tavyume or Yom Tov. Okay, so this is the story about imbeciles being able to have prophecy. And in what way was prophecy given to children? It was like this incident involving the daughter of Rav Chisda, who, when she was a child, was sitting on her father's lap while he sat and learned. Rava and Rav Rami Bar Chama were sitting before him. Rav Chisda jokingly said to his daughter, "Which of them would you want as a husband?" She said, "I want both of them." Rava said, "And I will be last." And this is what happened. First she married Rami Bar Chama, and when he died, she married Rava. Having already cited one statement of Rabbi Avdimi from Haifa, the Gemara cites another statement in his name. Rabbi Avdimi from Haifa says, "Before a person eats and drinks, he has two hearts, meaning his heart is unsettled because he is distracted by hunger. But after he eats and drinks, he has only one heart. As it is stated, a hollow man is two-hearted. How is it indicated that nevuv means hungry? As it is written concerning the altar, nevuv luchot, which we translate into Aramaic as hollow with planks, meaning that a hollow person, that is one who has not yet eaten, is two-hearted." The Gemara continues to discuss the meaning of nevuv. Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, says, with regard to one who is accustomed to wine, although his heart, that is his mind, is closed like a virgin, wine opens it, as it is stated, and new wine opens the virgins. The word yenovev is used here in the sense of clearing out a space. Even if one's heart and mind are closed, wine will open them to understanding. Okay. It's 10:15, and I have to get ready for the next thing that's coming up in my schedule today. So let's stop here. And we will meet again next Sunday. So we're back on a kind of a regular schedule again. Let me stop screen sharing. So I hope everybody has a good rest of the day. And Michael, I hope you feel better. And take care, and we'll see you next week.